everyone, and welcome to the Property Podcast. It's Rob B with Rob D, and this is episode 276. For many people, it's a dream to go and refurb a property and see the results it can bring. And sometimes that process goes really well. And sometimes it's just bloody hard. So this week, we're going to look at the reality of refurbing.
Yeah, thank you for joining us once again on the Property Podcast. We've got a cracking episode today. You're going to hear what it really takes to get big results in property in a short period of time. People will tell you that it's easy. They'll tell you that everyone will do it. By the end of today's episode, you'll know that that's definitely not the case, and you'll have picked up some practical tips for how to make sure that you are one of the ones who does make it work.
So it's time for our news story of the week. And this week's headline is Stamp Duty Revenues Plunge as Housing Market Freezes. So stamp duty taxes have gone up, but yet revenues are falling. Rob, what's happening?
Yeah, what's happening is the Treasury is 7% worse off in this financial year so far compared to last year, apparently. Stamp duty is probably one of the more hated taxes that is around. The Treasury loves it because it tends to bring in a lot of money. This year it's going to bring in 12.2 billion. But last year it brought in 13.1, and it's bringing in 700 million less than it was supposed to, even though stamp duty for more expensive properties went up sharply last time they shuffled it all around, and even though investors are paying 3% more than everyone else. How could this be?
Well, we were excited by this news story because we could refer to the Laffer curve. And basically, the concept is this, that if you raise taxes, then they will increase revenue. But at some point, you can raise taxes to a point that it actually hurts the market, transactions decrease, and therefore revenues decrease. And we're not suggesting that the increase in tax and stamp duty is the only contributor to the market not performing as well as it has done. We expected this through the mid-cycle wobble. However, the aggressive nature of stamp duty can only be having a negative impact on the property market and the amount of transactions taking place. The government has been incredibly short-sighted with stamp duty tax raises, as it prohibits people from investing in these properties, particularly more expensive properties where the revenues are at the most for the Treasury. And I think this is a great lesson for some of our maybe hardcore listeners who may say things like, oh, always increase taxes, the rich need to be punished, the middle classes need to be punished. And that's not necessarily the case. Increased taxes in certain areas, absolutely. But you've got to be very clever with this. It's not to put taxes up everywhere and suddenly we've got more revenue. That's not how it works. How our economy works is a beautiful thing, but really misunderstood. And unfortunately, the governments in charge have misunderstood how it works here because they put taxes up, but they're making less.
Yeah, it's hardly surprising, really, is it, that when you tax something, you get less of it. That's the reason why some things get taxed. There are huge taxes on cigarettes, for example, to try to stop people from smoking. But then you go and tax people for moving house, which is what you want them to do. And you tax employers for providing jobs, which is what you want them to do. So it's kind of weird that you use taxes punitively in one area, then get all surprised when it creates incentives that you didn't want in another. So seeing as no one's very happy about stamp duty, it's bringing in less revenue for the government and it's slowing down the housing market, will we see changes in the next budget? Well, we'll just have to wait and see.
A quick reminder now, Hubbers, that our meetups are next week. So we have meetups all over the UK and actually around the world now. If you're keen to mix with like-minded people, talk property at a free event that's super friendly with no selling, sounds like a dream, doesn't it? Well, it's real. You can go to thepropertyhub.net/meetups, get your ticket and get along to an event local to you. So go and check that out. They are super fun.
Now, last week we were talking about the differences between buying new builds or very nearly new properties and buying properties that are older and need some work. Now, new builds are great if you want an easy life. They're usually ready to go. There won't be too much in the way of maintenance issue. We talked about the capital growth that they tend to have. So they're a nice, predictable, well-performing investment. So why then didn't we say that everyone should just be going out, ignoring older properties and buying new builds? Well, as we started to explain, there is a lot more work, but there's a lot more opportunity in older properties as well. Now, we're very lucky in that we're starting to build a sizable team at the Property Hub. And because our team loves property and practice what they preach, they're off doing really interesting and impressive things in property themselves, which means we get to be pretty lazy when it comes to picking our guests. So today we're talking to a hubber who is also the producer of this very podcast and who is doing some really interesting things. So Dan, hi, thank you for joining us. So Dan, you're playing property on hard mode, really. The start of your journey has been focused on refurbishing distressed property, and you're not doing it close to home either. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to and why you're doing it.
Hey guys. So I've got a goal of trying to reach 3K per month in cash flow. And so far to get there, I've refurbed 5 properties and I'm about to complete on a 6th property, which will need refurbishment as well. I began in Nottingham, where I did my first 3 properties. Then I refurbed a flat I was actually living in South London. And then about 12 months ago, I focused my attention on Manchester and Stockport, and that's where property number 5 and soon to be property number 6 are located.
Busy. Okay, so you've been in it for a little while, Dan, and you've got a figure that you're trying to reach, which is awesome. What have you decided on as your strategy, and has this changed at all over time?
It has changed over time. When I first started, I didn't really have much of a goal in mind. I just thought this is a good way to bring in money that I don't actually have to work for, passive income. And it wasn't long after I started looking into what I could do, I realized that my capital was not going to last forever. So distress seemed the best way to maximize that. I don't earn mega bucks doing my day job, so I needed to make every single pound that I earned count. With distressed property, it was an opportunity to buy below market value, and I wasn't doing anything special to do that. It was simply dealing with agents and doing viewings. But the big thing for me was I was able to refinance or take a further advance on any property that I had done work to, and that allowed me to recycle as much capital as possible to be able to move on to the next one. And that just really sped up the process for me rather than saving up and doing the next property once I'd had enough in the bank.
I like that, Dan. Clever little plug for a pay rise in the middle. And what's really interesting for me, Dan, is how you said you didn't know what you were doing when you started, because that, although may seem like, people listen to the podcast, you've got to know exactly step by step what you're doing. And yes, that's great. But once you're here and once you know that, most people start without having a clue what to do. Like good intentions, like knowing that property is generally a good thing to do, but how it will get you to your end goal and achieve the results you want, it's people don't often know how to do that from the very beginning. And those who do are super lucky, and well done to you. But most people start the way you have, Dan. I know I certainly did. So I think it's going to be refreshing for listeners to hear that, so you don't have to be smashing out mega deals and charging towards your end goal from your first deal. You can do a lot of learning and still get ahead, but maybe not know exactly what you're doing. So
Dan, your target area is currently Manchester. Before that, it was Nottingham. But you don't live in either of those places. You're based in South London. This is going to be a situation that a lot of people are in, especially these days. A lot of investors down south looking north for greater value, but not an easy thing to do. So tell us how you've done it. Talk us through your process of finding a distressed property when you are investing from a distance.
Yeah, well, like a lot of people who listen probably can relate to, the best deals are probably not where you live. And being in London, there was no way I was going to build any kind of portfolio with the prices that are around where I live. So for me, it was just a case of planning ahead. I would book in as many viewings for a Saturday, or I'd book a day off from work and just call as many estate agents as possible in my target area and basically try and fill up a day with as many viewings as possible. And then it was just a case of, all right, well, Saturday I need to be up in Manchester by 9 o'clock. So that would mean booking a ridiculously early train from London Euston on a Saturday morning. And then it was just a step-by-step process. So the next thing would be hire a car, go pick it up, drive to the first viewing, have a look, drive to the next viewing. So the first time I went up to Manchester, I saw probably 2 places the entire day. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what part of the city I wanted to invest in. I didn't know how to get around. And so that first trip for me was about removing some mental roadblocks and just knowing that I could wake up in my bed in London and by 9:30 in the morning, I could be in Manchester viewing a house. And that was a really important thing for me to achieve. Now I've done it quite a few times. I'm much more efficient. I know exactly what train to catch. I know where the car hire place is. I know how to drive around Manchester now. I know how to get to the viewings, and that made it a lot easier. And as I became more efficient, I understood what kind of stock I wanted to see in what kind of areas, and that made making decisions when it came to the crunch a lot more easy to make. And after a few trips, I got to know some of the viewing agents as well. And they would from time to time give me a little tip here or a little tip there, like this one's been on the market for quite some time now, or we know that the vendor on this one is really, really keen to sell. And so it's just by building up a little bit of a rapport with these people on a week-to-week basis that they got to know me, they got to know what I was after, they got to know what I was about, and they really helped me along. I also remember walking through a couple of properties. This has actually happened in one of the properties I bought, where there was a young couple who were looking at it to buy to move into. And I remember them saying, wow, this is what we're after, but it's just far too much work for us to do. And that was just music to my ears. I knew that what would be a problem to someone else was a real opportunity for me. After that, it was just a matter of throwing in a whole bunch of lowball offers, and eventually one of them came off.
Okay, so a lot of work, Dan, and I admire the commitment that you put in there. You know, it's easy to say you want to go and invest in the north and take advantage of the market there, but actually getting up at weekends, travelling on the train, getting on buses, viewing properties, not everyone will do that. And I think that's really important, is that property investment isn't always easy. And in fact, actually, if you want to take advantage of it, the results and rewards probably shouldn't be that easy, and you have to put the work in. And I like the fact as well, you know, that Aussie charm, getting to know the vendors, getting little tips and hints, that rapport building, which is absolutely a universal lesson that everyone can take advantage of.
There's a little comment in there as well, which I think is really important to pick out and highlight, which is that you said you made a lot of lowball offers. And when you are going in and having to drive a hard bargain, you do need to make a lot of offers. And I'll often hear from people saying things like, oh, I've made 3 offers now that are below the asking price, and they've all been turned down. What am I doing wrong? And, but no, you're not doing anything wrong. It is a numbers game, and that's even more difficult when you're doing it from a distance, because of course you just want to stop having to get out of bed at 6 a.m. and travel all that way, and you want to secure a property. But if you're expecting that and you keep your discipline, then you'll get there in the end. Now clearly Danny did that, but the hard work doesn't stop there, because once you've actually secured this property, as we were talking about in the intro, it's not just ready to let. And I think the process of having to refurb a property from a distance, actually people find a lot more daunting than finding the property in the first place. So talk us through how you went about doing that.
So it was a very similar process as to finding the property itself. I needed to find a builder who could do the work for me. So day to day, instead of checking Rightmove all day long, I started to check websites like Check a Trade, or I trawled through the Property Hub forum, and basically I called like a lot of builders and made a lot of bookings. And then again, it was the same process. I'd book an early train, I'd get up there on a weekend, get to the property, and just instead of me driving all over Manchester, I had Manchester coming to me with different builders to give me a quote on the job. It wasn't all smooth sailing though. Quite often people just wouldn't turn up. I remember booking an entire day off work, got up there for a 9 o'clock start. I had 5 builders booked in to give me 5 different quotes, and literally not one of them turned up. So that was a fun day. And out of all the builders who did actually walk through the house and had a look, probably only half of them actually sent me a quote. After that, I had a pretty diverse range of prices, and I kind of knew the ballpark that I was going to settle in. I actually found a builder that I liked and I got on quite well with, and he definitely wasn't the cheapest, but I knew he was the builder I wanted to use. So I used all the different quotes to settle on a price with him, and then we decided to move forward on it.
Okay, so a lot of work has already been done just to get a builder lined up and be ready to start doing the actual work of refurbing the property. So what kind of work are we talking about here? What did the property need doing to it?
Well, the property's a terrace, 2 up, 2 down. It's got a small courtyard. It's nothing too big. It needed complete modernisation, so luckily there was nothing structural that was wrong. It was just a case of I wanted to remove a fireplace so that wouldn't cause me an issue down the track. The plastering on the walls and the ceilings. The kitchen needed an update. Complete new bathroom, new boiler, new consumer unit. Just the basic things that you would need to do to modernise a house.
So fair amount of work, Dan. Were there any issues?
There weren't too many issues. Like I said, it was a pretty simple cosmetic job. By the end, the house looked brand new, so I was really, really happy with that. Since then, there's been a few issues with snagging, but nothing too terrible. The lettings agent have been absolutely amazing. There's a little plug for Yellow there. They've really kind of come through helping me get just the final little bits and pieces done and making sure the tenant's nice and happy. One of the hardest things was the communication between the builder and I. In the beginning, it was quite simple with lots of texts going back and forth and some WhatsApp messages with pictures and things like that to show me some progress. And that started to peter out towards the end of the build project. There'd be times where I'd be waiting a couple of days to get an answer back, whether I'm coming up this weekend to view how things are going or when things are going to be finished. This happened 3 or 4 times towards the end where I was told that the job was going to be completed, so I'd book another day off work, go through the whole process of catching a train, hiring a car, getting to the property, just to find out that the property wasn't ready because during the week someone had let the builder down. That's totally fine, completely understandable, but just that little bit of communication between me and the builder could have saved me all the expense and time that comes with getting up to the property in the first place.
So you've plugged a fair few hours into this project, Dan, and you know there's been hassle and it's not all been rainbows and unicorns. And with all those trips up to lovely Manchester, was it worth it?
Yeah, I think it was worth it. The property was rented out almost instantly, just a couple of days after going on the market. Again, that was thanks to a good lettings agent, Yellow. And about 6 months after taking ownership, I applied for a further advance on the property to try and release some of the equity.
I'll jump in at this point to explain the model to anyone who's not familiar with it. This is something that's often called buy, refurb, refinance. And this is where all the aggro of doing work to a property can really pay off. So the idea is you buy a property that needs a load of work doing to it. You try and get it at the best price you possibly can. And you then do that work, but in doing so, you add value far in excess of the amount of money that you've spent on actually getting the property up to scratch. And at that point, as soon as the mortgage companies will let you, you can refinance based on the property's new value, therefore increasing your borrowing and pulling out some of the cash that you initially sunk in, ready to go again. When you're buying a new property, you've got to allow some time for the property market to do the work for you and for the value of that property to go up. You're not going to just be able to refinance in 6 months. That's why this is a strategy suitable for people who are in a hurry. People like Dan who have got that target that they want to get to quickly. So by going to all that effort, they're able to redeploy some of their original capital into another property and build the snowball that little bit quicker. That's the theory. Dan, can you talk us through the actual numbers of how it worked out for you in this case?
Yeah, the basic numbers for this deal is the property cost around 100k. So that was about 30k in cost, which includes the deposit, stamp duty, legals. Works cost another 10,000, a little bit more with snagging, but nothing too major. Then what I was able to do is get the property valued at 125,000, which then gave me around 22,000 in equity that I was able to release. So of all the capital that I put into the property to begin with, only about 18 of that is still tied up. And that means I've got just over 20,000 back that I can then use for the next deposit, for the next property, and keep the snowball rolling. Now, even after doing this equity release, it's only added a tiny little bit to my holding cost each month. And the property still yields around 6%.
That's brilliant. I mean, you hear stories about people managing to pull all of their cash back out of a deal, but I think that is incredibly difficult to do and actually quite rare. If you can get half your money out, you're doing very, very well. And that's exactly what you did there. So it wasn't easy, but a brilliant end result and another great step towards that goal that you've got that undoubtedly you'll hit before too long. Having been through that whole process and come out the other end, what words of wisdom do you have for the many people, I'm sure, who are going to want to replicate what you've done?
Well, I think it sounds really hard to say, I'm going to buy a property at the opposite end of the country, I'm going to refurb it, I'm going to get it rented out, I'm going to try and pull out as much capital as possible. And it is hard, but that's because of the mental roadblocks that I had. So for me, I just literally had to break it out into bite-sized steps. It was just a case of, today, I'm going to make some viewings. Saturday, I'm going to catch a 7 a.m. train to Manchester. After that, I'll hire a car. And each time I went up, the process got quicker, it got easier, and I became more efficient at it. I'm also very aware that I could have got a better property, I could have got it at a better price, I could have got a higher spec refurb, and I could have done that at a lower cost. But I was also aware of my limitations. I didn't know Manchester particularly well. I live in South London, so I can't just pop in to check things out every single day after work. I also work 6 days a week, so I'm really time poor, but I am lucky that I don't have any children yet. I'm also lucky that my girlfriend is really understanding and supportive of the whole process. Another limitation is my capital. It's not infinite. I have to make what I have work. And the other thing is I have absolutely zero building knowledge. But like I've heard both you Robs say from time to time, there's no perfect deal at all. So I wasn't trying to find one. I was simply just trying to find a deal that worked for me at the time. So each one of these limitations I mentioned makes it a little bit more expensive or a little bit more hard work or reduces the amount of capital I can pull out. But every time I go through the process, I'm getting better and better at it. And I'm actually waiting for the day that this becomes really mundane and boring and I can do it with my eyes closed.
It's been awesome to have Dan on because Rob and I go out of our way to be hands-off. But there's so many of our listeners who want to be hands-on. And I think getting that real-life experience from someone who's been there and done it is fantastic. What's also fantastic is it's not Instagram property. It's not Dan had some money, found a great deal, refurbed it without any bother, made a ton of cash and moved on to the next one and posted some fancy before and after photos along the way. There's so much more to it. But think about what's happened there. Dan has found a property, been able to get half of his funds back out, reinvest that and go again. That is difficult, but it should be. You should have to put the effort in to achieve those amazing results. And while so many people say they want to invest in property, are you prepared to get up on a Saturday morning when everyone else is sleeping in, to get on a train, to go up to Manchester, to wander around, meet an estate agent, dead lead after dead lead, offer rejected after offer rejected. It's not as easy as some people make out. Some people tell you the headlines, invest this money, here's the fantastic result. But what we don't hear enough about in property is the work that needs to go in to achieve the results. And unless you pay for somebody else to do the work, you have to do the work. There is no lazy person's option to this. You either pay someone else to do it or you do it yourself. There is no property fairy that's going to do it for free and suddenly give you all the results. So I think what's fantastic is that Dan has put the hard work in. He has got the results. But as we've heard, there were setbacks along the way.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be able to share this story and stories like this because it's real. This is real property. It's getting in there, it's grinding it out, it's working hard and getting results. You tend to hear more about the outliers, but they are outliers. This is what success in property really looks like. It's turning up, doing the work and sticking with it even when it's hard. You could always find reasons why it's not going to work or reasons not to try and go, I could never do that because of blah, blah, blah. And maybe that's true. This strategy isn't going to work for everyone. And if there's absolutely no way that you can find a way of fitting in all this work, then that strategy, much as you'd like it to and much as it speeds things up, isn't going to work for you. But for many people listening, it is possible. You're just putting all these objections in the way. And I really like how Dan was aware of that and he worked to break down his mental barriers and appreciated the importance of getting over the obstacles in his own head.
That's a great point, Rob. This strategy might not work for everyone, but there will be another strategy that works perfectly for you. So listing out reasons why you can't do something is just a BS story you're telling yourself to make yourself feel better. There is a strategy. Even if you've got no money, there are ways to acquire capital to get going. There is always a way. It's just you're telling yourself a nice little story to make yourself feel more comfortable on why it can't be done. But as we've heard today, it can be done with effort, perseverance, research, and sometimes a little bit of luck. But you know what? If you put the effort in, luck often follows. Okay, it's review time, and we've got two awesome hubbers who've contributed to our reviews this week. First one's from Tamira, who says, don't read the property section newspapers, listen and learn. Always down to earth, sensible advice and the truth behind the headlines. These guys know exactly what they're talking about because they're doing it, living it and breathing it. I'd actually score it 10 out of 5 if I could. Thank you so much. And also a huge thanks to Happy Investor 99, who says, brilliant podcast that has changed my life. Over the last few years, the two Robs have encouraged me through my first few buy-to-let purchases and given me the confidence to continue to expand my portfolio. I really couldn't have done it without you. Disagree. Well done. If you've used this as a tool for your motivation, fantastic. But you've taken the action, so well done. Brilliant reviews. Thank you so much, guys.
All right, that is just about us done for the Property Podcast. Thanks so much to Dan for coming on and sharing his story. I'm sure you loved hearing about that, and hopefully it's left you fired up and motivated to go out and do something this week. Do come back in time, though, to join us for next week's episode, where we're going to be sharing some fantastic negotiating tactics from some very, very smart hubbers. And if you can find a minute and you'd like to know what we get up to beyond the podcast, you can sign up for our next Discovery webinar. That's thepropertyhub.net/discover. Until we meet again, have a fantastic week and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.